Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya Muhammad Rafli Faza dari program studi Ilmu Komunikasi semester 4 ingin membacakan buku Study Islamic Epistemology Al-Ghazali Mustafa Abu Suwaid, karyanya Mustafa Abu Suwaid. Mustafa Abu Suwaid adalah seorang akademisi dan pemikir Islam terkemuka yang aktif dalam bidang filsafat dan studi Islam sejak 1996. Ia menjadi profesor filsafat dan studi Islam di Universitas Al-Quds, Yerusalem. Ia juga dikenal sebagai pemegang pertama Integral Chair for the Study of Imam Al-Ghazali's work di Masjid Al-Aqsa dan Universitas Al-Quds 2012-2020. Posisi yang didanai oleh Endowment Raja Abdullah II dari Yordania. Pendidikan dan karir akademik yang tercatat di sejarah yang setelah saya di berbagai web, Mustafa Abu Suwaid meraih gelar PhD dalam bidang filsafat dari Boston College pada tahun 1993. Sebelum mengajar di Universitas Al-Quds, ia pernah menjadi dosen di International Islamic University Malaysia pada tahun 1993 sampai 1996. Selain itu, ia juga pernah menjabat sebagai Fulbright Scholar in Residence di Wilkes-Barre College for the Atlantic University pada tahun 2003 sampai tahun 2004 dan menjadi profesor tamu di Bard College, New York tahun 2008 hingga 2010. Abu Suwaid menjabat sebagai dekan Fakultas Studi Islam Universitas Al-Quds dari 2014 hingga 2020. Dalam karirnya, ia aktif memberikan ceramah internasional, termasuk mengajar dan membaca karya Ihya Ulumuddin Imam Al-Ghazali di Masjid Al-Aqsa dan menjadikannya lebih mudah diakses oleh Muslim berbahasa Inggris. Ya, masuk ke pengenalan. Introduction. The basic issue that this book will be concerned with is the genetic development of Al-Ghazali's epistemology. It is my contention that his epistemology evolved through various stages, but both his life writing reflect this development. As a student, he began his academic life with an interest in traditional Islamic studies such as jurisprudence, fiqh, and fundamentals of jurisprudence, usul al-fiqh. After he assumed his first teaching position at the Nizamiya School of Baghdad, he became a methodological skeptic, a situation which prompted him to study all schools of thought available at the time in search for peremptory knowledge, ilm yakini. From skepticism, he moved to Sufism, Islamic mysticism, and finally there are indications that he ended up studying the tradition, hadith of Prophet Muhammad SAW, which might need to claim that he shifted to the methodology of the traditionalist al-Hadith, and that upon Sufism it is the aim of this study to trace Al-Ghazali's quest for knowledge throughout his life. This study will take into consideration the historical circumstances and the social context in which Al-Ghazali flourished. It is my conviction that this circumstance influence his personal and thus his intellectual life as well. Yang artinya persoalan dasar yang akan dibahas dalam buku ini adalah perkembangan genetik epistemologi Al-Ghazali. Saya berpendapat bahwa epistemologi Al-Ghazali berkembang melalui beberapa tahap, baik kehidupan maupun karya-karyanya, mencerminkan perkembangan tersebut. Sebagai seorang pelajar, ia memulai kehidupan akademiknya dengan minat yang jelas pada studi Islam tradisional seperti fikih dan usul fiqh, dasar-dasar hukum Islam. Setelah ia menduduki posisi pengajar pertamanya di Madrasah Nizamiyah Baghdad, ia menjadi seorang skeptikus metodologis, suatu kondisi yang mendorongnya untuk mempelajari seluruh aliran pemikiran yang tersedia pada masanya dalam rangka mencari pengetahuan yang pasti, ilmu al-yakin. Dari fase skeptisisme, ia kemudian bergerak menuju tasawuf, mistisisme Islam. Pada akhirnya terdapat indikasi bahwa ia menutup perjalanan intelektualnya dengan mempelajari hadis hadis-hadis Nabi Muhammad SAW yang menyebabkan banyak pihak beranggapan bahwa ia beralih pada metodologi kaum tradisionalis al-hadis dan meninggalkan tasawuf. Tujuan utama kajian ini adalah menelusuri perjalanan pencarian pengetahuan Al-Ghazali sepanjang hidupnya. Di studi penelitian ini juga akan mempertimbangkan kondisi historis dan konteks sosial di mana Al-Ghazali hidup dan berkembang. Saya meyakini bahwa kondisi-kondisi tersebut mempengaruhi kehidupan pribadinya dan sebagai konsekuensinya kehidupan intelektual. Previous studies, penelitian beliau sebelumnya. There are numerous previous studies of Al-Ghazali. However, most of these studies deal with subjects such as Sufism, ethics, and jurisprudence, while very few of these studies deal with Al-Ghazali's epistemology. None of them could be considered comprehensive. No studies so far have used all of his book to determine his epistemology, and certainly these studies did show that the genetic development that took place in his thought. One of the studies that deal with Al-Ghazali's notion of knowledge, ma'rifah, is Jabray's La Notion de la Ma'rifah is Al-Ghazali. Although he discussed the relationship of ethics to the notion of ma'rifah, this approach remained philological. This philological method was also used by Hafizul Yafeh primarily to determine the authenticity of Al-Ghazali's work. Another study that discussed Al-Ghazali theory of knowledge is Dunya al-Haqiqah fi Nazar al-Ghazali. This study was limited in its source and depended heavily on Mi'raj al-Quds, a book that was attributed to Al-Ghazali but remained unconfirmed because none of the medieval Muslim historiographers list this book. Nor there are cross-references in Al-Ghazali confirmed books. I have undertaken the task of studying all of Al-Ghazali working in order to trace the development in his epistemology. Basic working list can be found in Badawi's Mu'allafat Al-Ghazali, number 1 until 72. The criteria of choosing this book are based on any of the two following conditions. The first is that there should be cross-reference in Al-Ghazali works, as it was his habit to mention book that he wrote or those he was going to write. And the second is that it has to be mentioned by medieval historiographer, such as in Ibn al-Subki, Tabaqat al-Safi'iyyah al-Kubra. This book is a biography of the jurist who belongs to the Safi'i school of jurisprudence. Al-Ghazali was one of them. While I have considered secondary sources, I mostly relied upon Arabic texts of Al-Ghazali's work. This was to fight the possibility of distortion in translation. There are numerous previous studies of Al-Ghazali. Terdapat banyak penelitian terdahulu tentang Al-Ghazali. Bagaimanapun, sebagian besar kajian tersebut membahas tema-tema tentang tasawuf, seperti tasawuf, etika, dan fikih. Sementara hanya sedikit yang secara khusus membahas epistemologi Al-Ghazali. Bahkan tidak satupun dari penelitian tersebut dapat dianggap komprehensif, karena belum ada kajian yang menggunakan seluruh karya Al-Ghazali untuk menentukan epistemologinya. Selain itu, penelitian tersebut juga tidak menunjukkan perkembangan genetik yang terjadi dalam pemikirannya. Salah satu kajian yang membahas konsep pengetahuan Ma'rifah Al-Ghazali adalah karya Jabri berjudul La Notion de la Ma'rifah, Al-Ghazali. Meskipun membahas hubungan antar etika dan konsep ma'rifah, pendekatan yang digunakan bersifat filologis. Metode filologis yang sama juga digunakan oleh Hafizul Yafeh, terutama untuk menentukan keaslian karya-karya Al-Ghazali. Kajian lain yang membahas teori pengetahuan Al-Ghazali adalah karya Sulaiman Dunya berjudul Al-Haqiqah fi Nazar Al-Ghazali. Namun penelitian ini terbatas dari segi sumber dan sangat bergantung pada kitab Mi'raj al-Quds, sebuah karya yang dinisbatkan kepada Al-Ghazali tetapi masih diragukan keasliannya. karena tidak disebutkan oleh sejarawan Muslim abad tengah dan tidak memiliki rujukan silang dalam karya-karya Al-Ghazali yang telah terkonfirmasi. Saya telah mengambil tugas untuk mengkaji seluruh karya Al-Ghazali guna menelusuri perkembangan epistemologinya. Daftar kerja utama yang digunakan bersumber dari karya Badawi Mu'allafat Al-Ghazali yang mencantumkan karya-karya bernomor 1 hingga 72. Kriteria pemilihan karya-karya tersebut didasarkan pada dua syarat utama. Yang pertama adalah adanya rujukan silang dalam karya-karya Al-Ghazali sendiri, karena ia terbiasa menyebutkan karya-karya yang telah atau akan ia tulis. Dan yang kedua, karya tersebut disebutkan oleh sejarawan Muslim abad pertengahan seperti dalam Tabaqat al-Safi'iyah al-Kubra karya Ibnu al-Subki. Meskipun saya mempertimbangkan sumber-sumber sekunder, kajian ini terutama bertumpu pada teks-teks Arab asli karya Al-Ghazali untuk menghindari kemungkinan distorsi akibat terjemahan. The first chapter covers the life of Al-Ghazali. There, the primary interest is to present the socio-political context, which explain his intellectual movement, the political scenes at the time, and the role he played in shaping it is covered. Thought in his position regarding major events are also discussed. In addition, his formal education and academic career and the event related to them are investigated. The next 5 chapters survey the book that were writing during the corresponding stage of the 5 period in Al-Ghazali's life according to Maurice Boyce's division, which I have adopted. The first of this stage began with his life as a student. The second covered the first period of public teaching and the Nizamiya of Baghdad. The third dealt with his years of seclusion and withdrawal from public teaching at the Nizamiya of Nishapur. And the fifth reflects the last stage in Al-Ghazali's life after his second withdrawal from public teaching. Struktur kajian yang bab pertama membahas kehidupan Al-Ghazali dengan fokus utama pada konteks sosial politik yang menjelaskan pergerakan intelektualnya, situasi politik pada masanya, serta peran Al-Ghazali di dalamnya dibahas secara rinci. Hubungannya dengan berbagai aliran pemikiran dan sikapnya terhadap peristiwa-peristiwa besar juga dianalisis, termasuk pendidikan formal dan perjalanan akademiknya. 5 bab berikutnya mengkaji karya-karya Al-Ghazali yang ditulis pada 5 tahap kehidupan sesuai pembagian Maurice Boyce yang diadopsi dalam penelitian ini. Tahap pertama mencakup masa studinya. Tahap kedua mencakup periode pertama pengajaran publiknya di Nizamiyah Baghdad. Tahap ketiga membahas masa pengasingan dan penarikannya dari pengajaran publik. Tahap kelima mencerminkan tahap akhir kehidupannya setelah penarikan diri kedua dari pengajaran publik. Thus, in the second chapter, I studied the work that were written when Al-Ghazali was a student during the years 4065 until 4078 EH or 1072 until 1085 CE. I began by outlining his search of knowledge in order to define his epistemology during this period, process which will be repeated in each of the following chapter in an attempt to trace the development in his epistemology. Bab kedua membahas karya-karya yang tulis selama masa studinya pada tahun 465 Hijriah sampai 478 Hijriah atau yang bertepatan dengan 1072 Masehi sampai 1085 Masehi. Pada bab ini sumber-sumber pengetahuannya diuraikan untuk mendefinisikan epistemologinya pada periode tersebut, sebuah pendekatan yang diulang pada bab-bab berikutnya untuk menelusuri perkembangan pemikirannya. The third chapter covers Al-Ghazali work during his first period of public teaching at the Nizamiyah of Baghdad, which extend from 4078 EH or 1085 CE till 4088 488 EH or 1095 CE. In this chapter, I discuss his systematic inquiry in quest of eternal light. In addition, his encounter with the different school of thought, including the philosopher, will be investigated. Finally, I explored the influence of Sufism on his epistemology and how it led to his withdrawal from public life. Bab ketiga mencakup karya-karya Al-Ghazali selama periode pertama pengajaran publik di Nizamiyah Baghdad pada tahun 478 sampai 488 Hijriah atau yang bertepatan dengan 1085 sampai 1095 Masehi. Bab ini membahas pencarian sistematisnya terhadap pengetahuan sejati, pertemuannya dengan berbagai aliran pemikiran, termasuk para filsuf, serta pengaruh tasawuf terhadap epistemologinya yang akhirnya mendorongnya menarik diri dari kehidupan publik. And the fourth chapter covered the work written during his year of seclusion from 488 or 1095 till 499 or 1106. In this chapter, I shall discuss the influence of Sufism on his epistemology. Of special importance is his introduction of a faculty higher than reason, malaka fawqa al-aql, as a sort of knowledge. I shall define the nature of the relationship between this new faculty and prophecy. Bab keempat ini membahas karya-karya yang ditulis selama masa pengasingannya pada tahun 488 sampai 499 Hijriah. Itu yang bertepatan dengan 1095 Masehi sampai 1106 Masehi. Pada tahap ini, pengaruh tasawuf terhadap epistemologinya dibahas secara mendalam, terutama pengenalan fakultas di atas akal, malakah fawqa al-aql, sebagai sumber pengetahuan serta hubungannya dengan kenabian. And the fifth chapter deals with the book that were written during the second period of public teaching at the Nizamiyah of Nishapur, 499 till 503, or 1106 until 1110. Bab kelima mengkaji karya-karya yang ditulis selama periode pengajarannya publiknya di Nizamiyah Nishapur pada tahun 499 sampai 503 Hijriah atau yang bertepatan dengan 1106 sampai 1110 Masehi. In the sixth chapter discuss the last stage in Al-Ghazali's life, 505 or 1111. This chapter questions the claim that he abandoned Sufism for the method of the traditionalists. Dan bab yang terakhir, bab ke-6 adalah bahas tahap terakhir kehidupan Al-Ghazali pada tahun 505 Hijriah atau yang bertepatan dengan 1111 Masehi, dengan mempertanyakan klaim bahwa ia meninggalkan tasawuf dan beralih sepenuhnya kepada metodologi kaum tradisionalis. Dan pada kali ini dari 6 bab tersebut saya akan membacakan bab yang ke-6, chapter 6, yaitu Al-Ghazali Quest for Knowledge, the second withdrawal from public teaching pada tahun 503 sampai 505 Hijriah atau yang bertepatan dengan 1110 sampai 1111. Oke, kita akan beralih ke bab 6, chapter 6. Okay. This chapter deals with the last stage in Al-Ghazali's life, which extends from his withdrawal from public teaching at the Nizamiyah of Nishapur until his death in 505 or 1111. During this period, he wrote three books: Al-Durrah al-Fakhirah fi Kashf Ulum al-Akhirah, The Precious Pearl in Unveiling the Science of the Hereafter, and Ilyam al-Awam and Ilmi al-Kalam, preventing the common people from engaging in the science of kalam, and Minhaj al-Abidin, the course of the worshipper. Bab ini membahas tahap terakhir dalam kehidupan Al-Ghazali yang dimulai sejak ia menarik diri dari pengajaran publik di Madrasah Nizamiyah Nishapur hingga wafatnya pada tahun 505 Hijriah atau yang bertepatan dengan 1011 Masehi. Pada masa ini ia menulis 3 karya. Yang pertama adalah Al-Durrah al-Fakhirah fi Kashf Ulum al-Akhirah, mutiara berharga dalam penyingkapan ilmu-ilmu akhirat, dan juga Iljam al-Awam an ilmi al-kalam, mencegah orang awam terlibat dalam ilmu kalam, dan yang terakhir ada kitab Minhaj al-Abidin, jalan para ahli ibadah. The aim of this chapter is to trace the last development in his epistemology and to question the claim that he abandoned Sufism and adopt the method of the traditionalists who consider the Quran and the Sunnah as the two major sources of knowledge. According to Al-Hafiz Abu Al-Qasim Ibn As-Sakir Al-Ghazali, study Al-Bukhari Sahih at the hand of Abu Sa'id Muhammad Ibn Ubaidullah Al-Hafsi. Nevertheless, it seemed that Abdul Ghafir Al-Farisi, Al-Ghazali's student and the Khatib of Nishapur, was the first one to relate his strong interest in studying hadith. He said, Al-Ghazali concluded the last year of his life by studying the hadith of Prophet Muhammad SAW, and by interacting with the scholar of hadith, he began reading the two books of Sun hadith, Al-Bukhari Sahih and Muslim Sahih. Had he lived longer, he would have in short time excelled in his art more than everybody else. In addition, he studied Abu Dawud al-Sijistani Sunan and the hand of Abu al-Fat al-Hakimi al-Tusi. Tujuan bab ini adalah menelusuri perkembangan terakhir epistemologi Al-Ghazali serta mengkaji klaim bahwa ia meninggalkan tasawuf dan beralih kepada metode kaum tradisionalis yang hanya mengakui Al-Quran dan Sunnah sebagai dua sumber utama pengetahuan. Menurut Hafiz Abu Al-Qasim Ibn As-Sakir Al-Ghazali mempelajari Sahih Al-Bukhari di bawah bimbingan Abu Sa'id Muhammad bin Ubaidullah Al-Hafsi. Namun demikian, tampaknya Abdul Ghafir Al-Farisi, murid Al-Ghazali dan khatib dari Nishapur, adalah orang pertama yang meriwayatkan ketertarikan Wat Al-Ghazali terhadap studi hadis. Ia berkata, Al-Ghazali menutup tahun-tahun terakhir hidupnya dengan mempelajari hadis Nabi Muhammad SAW dan berinteraksi dengan para ulama hadis. Ia mulai membaca dua kitab hadis Sahih Al-Bukhari dan Sahih Muslim. Seandainya ia hidup lebih lama dalam waktu singkat, ia akan melampaui siapapun dalam bidang ini. Selain itu, ia juga mempelajari Sunan Abu Dawud Al-Sijistani di bawah bimbingan Abu al-Fat al-Hakim al-Tusi. One can deny that Al-Farisi's statement indicate a serious attempt by Al-Ghazali to study hadith. This does not prove, however, as this Dimashqiyah attempt to show that Al-Ghazali returned to the method of the traditionalist Al-Salaf. The statement is quoted by Dimashqiyah from a page in Al-Subki Tabaqat Al-Safi'iyah Kubrah, in which Al-Farisi held that Al-Ghazali upon his return to establish his own school and build a lodge for the Sufis, Fanaqah al-Sifiyah. Moreover, he devoted part of his time for the Sufis, who were described as the people of the heart, Ahlul Qulub. It obvious that his historical account of building a lodge for the Sufis and tending to them is an indication of continued interest in Sufism. It remains that a study of his last three works is essential in determining Al-Ghazali's precise stand regarding Sufism. Dan tidak dapat disangkal bahwa pernyataan Al-Farisi menunjukkan adanya upaya serius dari Al-Ghazali dalam mempelajari hadis. Namun, hal ini tidak membuktikan sebagaimana yang dicoba ditunjukkan oleh Dimashqiyah bahwa Al-Ghazali kembali sepenuhnya kepada kaum tradisionalis Al-Salaf. The book Al-Durr al-Fakhira fi Kas'ul Ulum al-Akhirah the precious pearl in unveiling the signs of the hereafter is less theoretical than the other two books. It is concerned primarily with Islamic eschatology. It describes in great detail them such as death, the heaven and hell. Nevertheless, there are scattered statements which indicate his high esteem for the Sufis whom he described as the Gnostic Al-Arifun. He said, some of these who die proceed through the seven heavens until they reach the throne of Allah. Some of them are denying access to Allah. Only the Gnostic who know Him, Arifun, will reach Him. Al-Durrah Al-Fakhirah fi Ulum Al-Akhirah. Buku ini lebih sedikit bersifat teoretis dibandingkan dua karya lainnya. Kitab ini terutama membahas ekskatologi Islam. Di dalamnya dijelaskan secara rinci tema-tema seperti kematian, surga, dan neraka. Meskipun demikian, terdapat sejumlah pernyataan yang tersebar di dalamnya yang menunjukkan tingginya penghargaan Al-Ghazali terhadap kaum sufi yang ia sebut sebagai kaum Al-Arifun. Ia menyatakan bahwa sebagian orang yang wafat akan melewati 7 lapis langit hingga mencapai arsy-Nya Allah. Sebagian lainnya akan terhalang dari Allah, dan hanya kaum arif yang benar-benar mengenalnya dan yang akan sampai kepadanya. In another place in Durrah, he relates the story of Prophet Muhammad SAW intercession to Shafa'ah on behalf of his own people on the day of judgment. This intercession began with praising Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, innovation that is not used before. As to the nature of the praise, Al-Ghazali quote some Gnostic but Al-Arifin who argued that it was originally Allah's glorification of himself at the time he completed his creation of the world. Di bagian lain dalam Durrah, ia meriwayatkan kisah syafaat Nabi Muhammad SAW bagi umatnya pada hari kiamat. Syafaat tersebut diawali dengan pujian kepada Allah dengan cara yang belum pernah digunakan sebelumnya. The term Gnostic is also used in a third context. Al-Ghazali lists the category of those who are saved on the day of judgment. They are the beliefs, al-mu'minun, al-muslim, al-muslimun, the door of good work, al-muhsinin, the Gnostic, al-arifun, the believer in inflation, al-siddiqun, the martyrs, al-suhada, the righteous, al-salihun, and the messenger, al-mursalun. It should be noted that all these categories are mentioned in the Quran, with the exception for the Gnostic. All of these three instances involving the Gnostic, namely reaching the presence of Allah, except of their two men regarding the exaltation of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala and creating a special category for them along with the messenger on the day of resurrection, are clear indication of Al-Ghazali continued state of Sufis. Iljam al-Awam an ilmi al-Kalam. Al-Ghazali brought Iljam al-Awam an ilmi al-Kalam, preventing the common people from engaging in the science of Kalam, in order to explain the creed of the first generation of Muslim, Salaf, regarding the Divine's attribute, and to prove that their position is right and that any other position is an innovation, bid'ah. He held that this is necessary to avoid a question of anthropomorphism. This book was understood as a criticism of Kalam and metaphorical interpretation, ta'wil, of divine attribute, which from the essential stand of the later generation of Ash'arites, including Al-Ghazali. This position was misunderstood by many scholars, including Dimashqiyah, who said He experimented with Sufism, its illusion, self-mortification, testing emotion, circle of Zik, Hadroh, and seclusion, believing the claim of its master that what is right is not received from writing the revelation, but rather from the hidden esoteric sort, and that Allah, the Excel, did not provide guidance for the people in whatever verse He sent down from them, but rather in what He had for the possessor of the station Makoma and supernatural power expression. Unfailing and emanation, he remained like this until it became clear to him when the train of life passed by and the sun of his lifetime dwindled, died that he had was his life in seeking a false illusion and the erroneous impossible, while the infallible peremptory sword of knowledge was within the reach of his hand, rather close to his lip, and he died. May Allah be merciful to him, with the Sahih on his chest, as he were resisting death, so that he might drain from it whatever seems to clean off his inside, which was stuffed with knowledge of Batinitis, philosophies, kalam, and Sufism. Al-Ghazali menulis Iljam al-Awam an Ilmi al-Kalam, cegah orang awam terlibat dalam ilmu kalam, untuk menjelaskan akidah generasi pertama umat Islam, salaf, mengenai sifat-sifat ketuhanan, serta untuk bahwa membuktikan bahwa pandangan mereka adalah benar dan bahwa pandangan selainnya merupakan bid'ah. Ia berpendapat bahwa hal ini penting untuk menghindari persoalan antropomorfisme. Kitab ini dipahami sebagai kritik terhadap ilmu kalam dan penafsiran metaforis, takwil atas sifat-sifat ilahi yang merupakan ciri utama generasi Asy'ariyah, kemudian termasuk Al-Ghazali sendiri. Pandangan ini disalahpahami oleh banyak ulama, termasuk Dimashqiyah. Dimashqiyah held that unveiling the source of knowledge is a rival of the science of hadith. He interpreted Al-Ghazali position as deserting the Sufiqat in favor of the Salafiyah methodology, which is based on the Quran and the Sunnah. Dimashqiyah meant to spread the meaning of count people in Iljam al-Awam, getting the definition of count people. Al-Ghazali said, the category of count people include the man of letter, the grammarian, the scholar of hadith, the interpreter, the Quran, the jurist, and the mutakalim. Dimashqiyah menafsirkan sikap Al-Ghazali seolah-olah ia meninggalkan jalan tasawuf demi metodologi salafiyah yang berlandaskan Al-Quran dan Sunnah. Penafsiran ini muncul karena kesalahan memahami makna orang awam dalam Iljam al-Awam. Mengenai definisi orang awam, Al-Ghazali menyatakan kategori orang awam mencakup sastrawan, ahli nahwu, ulama hadis, mufassir, ahli fikih, dan mutakalim. In fact, the Sufis were the only people who were not considered among the awam, and therefore they were the only ones qualified to receive divine knowledge. He held that only 1 in 10 Sufis will reach what we describe as the kept secret. Al-Ghazali wanted to prevent all this included in the definition of count people from engaging in kalam and to accept the position of the Salaf regarding the interpretation of divine attribute. Thus, the passage Dimashqiyah refers to provide no basis for the claim that Al-Ghazali abandoned Sufism. Instead, Al-Ghazali maintained the high strength for the Sufi, as can be seen in the following analogy in which he compared the divine presence to that of the Sultan. this analogy is clear indication of Al-Ghazali's classification of the Sufis higher than common people, which include scholar of hadith, the very science that he was supposed to accept as the source of knowledge instead of unfailing, according to the many claims in this respect. To avoid any misunderstanding, I should say that he accepted hadith as a source of knowledge throughout his life, yet this acceptance on its own should not lead to any conclusion regarding his position toward other sources of knowledge. Another indication that he did not change his position concerning Sufism is his assertion regarding the existence of a faculty higher than reason. He reiterated his argument in respect of the inability of reason to perceive things such as the harm that result from sinning or the benefit that result from obedience in relationship to after death. He add he add that all those who are rational agree that reason cannot lead to specific knowledge similar to that in the Sharia, and that only a post-reason faculty can perceive metaphysical knowledge. It is obvious that Al-Ghazali maintained his idea on the limitation of reason, which he used to support his argument on the existence of a faculty higher than reason, which is accessible to the Sufis. Analogi ini merupakan indikasi jelas bahwa Al-Ghazali menempatkan kaum sufi pada posisi yang lebih tinggi daripada orang awam, yang justru mencakup para ulama hadis, ilmu yang oleh sebagian pihak diklaim sebagai satu-satunya sumber pengetahuan yang diterima Al-Ghazali, menggantikan konsep penyikapan. Untuk menghindari kesalahpahaman, perlu ditegaskan bahwa Al-Ghazali menerima hadis sebagai sumber pengetahuan sepanjang hidupnya. Namun, penerimaan tersebut tidak berarti penolakan terhadap sumber pengetahuan lain, seperti penyingkapan spiritual. Minhaj al-Abidin. This book, Minhaj al-Abidin, the course for the worshippers, is the last work known to be written by Al-Ghazali at the end of his life. Abdul Malik ibn Abdullah, on his students say, my honorable say, the successful and happy mystical imam, proof of Islam and ornament of religion, the honor of the nation, Abu Hamid bin Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Ghazali at-Tusi, may Allah sanctify his soul and may Allah raise his rank in heaven, dictate this concise book, which was the last book to be written by him and only copied by his very close companion. Ibn Abdullah preface to his own copy of Minhaj al-Abidin is important not only because it indicates that this is the last book to be written by Al-Ghazali, but also because it comes from one of the close companions, or what might be described as a member of the inner circle. Fact that add to the certitude of his statement. According to Al-Ghazali, this book was written in the same spirit of Ihya, except that he was hoping that Minhaj al-Abidin would not draw criticism similar to Ihya, which he blamed on the inability of the common people to understand it. He found consolation in the fact that the Quran, which is the perfect word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is described by non-Muslims of being story of past nation. Moreover, he kept referring the reader throughout Minhaj al-Abidin because it is concise book to read the corresponding chapter in the Ihya. Al-Ghazali gave no indication that he has retracted the basic position expressed in the Ihya, which of course include his views on the superiority of Sufism as a sort of knowledge. Overall order from It is clear that he did not mention everything he knew regarding Sufism for fear of misunderstanding. He cited for line of a poem by Zain al-Abidin in which he held that he kept a secret jealous of his knowledge, fearing an ignorant person who would accuse him of being an idolater of books. Buku kitab Minhaj al-Abidin atau Jalan Para Ahli Ibadah merupakan karya terakhir yang diketahui ditulis oleh Al-Ghazali pada akhir hidupnya. Abdul Malik bin Abdullah, salah satu muridnya, berkata, Syekhku yang mulia, Imam Sufi yang sukses dan bahagia, Hujjatul Islam dan Hasan agama, kebanggaan umat, Abu Hamid Muhammad bin Muhammad Al-Ghazali At-Tusi. Semoga Allah menyucikan ruhnya dan meninggikan derajatnya di surga. Mendiktekan kitab ringkas ini sebagai karya terakhirnya, dan kitab ini hanya disalin oleh para sahabat terdekat. Like the Ihya Minhaj al-Abid was written to explain the path to the hereafter, Al-Ghazali describes 7 obstacles that face the person who treads the path. According to him, the arrangement of the content of his book was an inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I will analyze the language that he used in discussing some of these obstacles where he explicitly used Sufi terms and them in order to determine whether there were any change in his epistemology. The first of these is the obstacle of science and knowledge, kepada al-ilm wa al-ma'rifah. In order to worship, one need to know what is that one is worshipping and to be certain about it. To overcome this obstacle, he held that one should seek help from the scholar for the hereafter, ulama al-akhir, who were the guide of his path. The saddle of this nation and the leader of the imams, one should benefit from them and should ask them for their good supplication, so he can cross this path with the help of Allah. Praise be to him, in order to attain peremptory knowledge, al-yaqin. Al-Ghazali maintained, since he accepted the Sufi path as the only way to achieve peremptory knowledge, which I understand the solution that Al-Ghazali provided to this obstacle as an invitation for people to seek a Sufi sheikh, among those whom he described as the scholar of the hereafter, who would guide the novice, the murid, on his path. Seperti Ihya Ulumuddin, Minhaj al-Abidin ditulis untuk menjelaskan jalan menuju akhirat. Al-Ghazali menjelaskan 7 rintangan yang dihadapi seseorang dalam menempuh jalan tersebut. Menurutnya, susunan kitab ini merupakan ilham dari Allah Subhanahu wa taala. Rintangan pertama adalah rintangan ilmu dan pengetahuan. Aqbatal ilm wal ma'rifah, untuk dapat beribadah dengan benar seseorang harus mengetahui pada siapa ia beribadah dan memiliki keyakinannya benar. Furthermore, he stated that while studying at the hand of a teacher facilitates knowledge and make it easier to save, Allah bestow his bounty on whomever he chooses from among his servant and become their direct teacher. The latter statement can conform to the definition of saving knowledge directly from Allah, which is known as al-ilm al-laduni. In this discussion of another obstacle that concerning worldly things, he considered the question of whether asceticism is an obligation. Al-Ghazali held that asceticism is an obligation in regard to forbidden haram, that is to say, refraining from things which are forbidden is obligatory on all, but one may refrain, one is not obligated to do so. in case of things which are permitted by Islamic law. He maintains that there is a higher level than this where the lawful is considered forbidden and therefore asceticism becomes obligatory. This higher level is pertaining to the Sufis who becomes Abdal. To explain this term, Abdal, one needs to know the hierarchy of a Sufi order. The Sufi order has one sheikh in the highest rank. He is described as Kutub. Head. The Kutub has three deputies, Nukoba, Singh, Naqib, to represent the second level. The third level comprises seven chief, Autad, Singh, Watad. Singularnya Wat. The fourth rank includes fourth substitution, Abdal, singular, Bada. It is the member of this latter rank that Al-Ghazali had in his mind when he made his comment that their asceticism is obligatory in both the lawful and the forbidden. The meaning of this is that once a Sufi reaches the fourth rank or higher, he regards lawful things as if they are dead animals. According to Islamic jurisprudence, one can eat of a dead animal only in case where if he did not, he would die. For Al-Ghazali, that dead animal becomes a metaphor of this world, where the Sufi would use enough of it to subsist in order to be able to continue worship. Untuk mengatasi rintangan ini, Allah menganugerahkan karunia-Nya kepada siapa saja yang Dia kehendaki di antara hamba-hambanya dan menjadi pengajar langsung bagi mereka. Pernyataan ini jalan dengan konsep sufi tentang mencapai ilmu langsung dari Allah yang dikenal sebagai ilmu al-laduni. Dalam pembahasan rintangan lain yaitu keterikatan kepada dunia, Al-Ghazali membahas apakah zuhud merupakan kewajiban. Ia membedakan antara hal yang haram dan yang halal serta menjelaskan bahwa pada tingkatan tertentu zuhud bisa menjadi kewajiban bagi seorang sufi. Moreover, he explained that asceticism should take place in regard to everything except for subsistence. He added that one might subsist with or without food and drink. If Allah wills the body to subsist without a cause, food and drink, it will do so, as do the angel. On the other hand, if He wills the body to subsist with something, it might be that you seek the things, or that He will cause the things to come to you without seeking. To support his argument, Al-Ghazali cited verse in the Quran which indicate that for one who fears Allah, He will find him a way out of his problem and that He will provide him with sustenance in a way that he did not expect. Another obstacle that Al-Ghazali discussed is people. He held that people will keep one from worshipping, and if he does worship in their presence, he may change the way he worships, an act which render him hypocrite. According to Al-Ghazali, the solution to this problem is seclusion, al-uzlah. He relates numerous hadiths, poem, and anecdote of Sufis in support of this notion. In addition, he defended the existence of Sufi school and lodge, Ribat al-Sufiyah, which fulfill the notion of seclusion, even though other people are present. He maintained that if problems arise in the special gathering, then it is legitimate for the scholar to seek absolute isolation, even if it leads to the burial of knowledge. He emphasized that finding comfort in the presence of people without need for studying is an indication of emptiness. Al-Ghazali discussed many other subjects such as poverty and celibacy. He held that poverty is better than with the face, better than wealth, and that celibacy is better than being preoccupied with the face of the wife and children. His position is based on the idea that the Sufi should be distinct and independent from worldly affairs. Rintangan yang lain yang dibahas oleh Al-Ghazali adalah manusia. Ia berpendapat bahwa manusia dapat menghalangi seseorang dari ibadah. Bahkan jika seseorang beribadah di hadapan orang lain, ia bisa terdorong untuk mengubah cara ibadahnya sehingga jatuh pada kemunafikan. Al-Ghazali juga membahas sebagai tema tasawuf lainnya seperti kemiskinan dan selibat. Ia menilai bahwa kemiskinan lebih baik daripada kekayaan dan selibat lebih utama daripada kesibukan mengurus keluarga, karena jalan sufi menuntut keterlepasan dari urusan duniawi. Conclusion. It is apparent then that Al-Durra al-Fakhirah, Ilyam al-Awam, and Ilm al-Kalam, and Minhaj al-Abidin, written during the last stage of Al-Ghazali life, contains clear manifestation of his continued acceptance of Sufism as the path for true knowledge. In Al-Durra al-Fakhirah, he held that the Sufis whom he described as Arifin Gnostic are the only people who found their death could proceed through the seven heaven to reach Allah. In Ilyam al-Awam, he employed the concept of common people. He defied every other kind of scholar from the Sufis. He ranked the Sufis higher, and he described them as the scholar of the hereafter. Finally, in Minhaj al-Abidin, he defended Sufi school and knowledge. In addition, he described the knowledge of the Sufi in terms of divine life, which is typical of unfailing kasf. All of these Sufi terms, which were also using Sufi terminology, leave no room for any doubt or hesitation that Al-Ghazali's epistemology was Sufi in its essence. It should be noted that this is not a defense of Sufism against the Salafiyah movement, which tried to present Al-Ghazali in his final days as someone who abandoned Sufism. What I'm trying to say is that they need a better argument for their position. Dengan demikian, jelas bahwa Al-Durrah al-Fakhirah, Ilyam al-Awam, Ilm al-Kalam, dan Minhaj al-Abidin yang ditulis pada tahap akhir kehidupan Al-Ghazali menunjukkan secara nyata bahwa ia tetap menerima tasawuf sebagai jalan menuju pengetahuan sejatinya. Seluruh tema tasawuf tersebut yang disampaikan dengan terminologi sufi tidak menyisakan keraguan bahwa epistemologi Al-Ghazali pada hakikatnya bersifat sofistik. Yang ingin saya sampaikan adalah bahwa mereka membutuhkan argumen yang lebih kuat untuk mendukung posisi mereka saat ini. Conclusion. In this book, I have offered a comprehensive study of Al-Ghazali epistemology, and all these confirmed and available work. I have argued that his epistemology evolved through the various stages of his life. He began as a conformist, accepting knowledge on the authority of parents and teachers, but soon he broke away from conformism while still a child. He stressed the importance of this step for anyone seeking true knowledge. After releasing himself from the authority of conformism, he began a long intellectual journey in quest for truth, which led him to question everything and eventually to experience one of the most original and dramatic case of skepticism in the history of thought. The way out of his skepticism was divine illumination after he regained his trust in logical necessities. He studied all the existing schools of thought, including philosophy, theology and debates. His search culminates in his acceptance of Sufism as the only path that leads to what he described as planetary knowledge, ilmu yakin. In chapter 1, I present sketch of Al-Ghazali life is an old not only his writing Al-Ghazali book on knowledge, but also his life is a direct manifesting of his spiritual and intellectual development. This is especially true when the person is a Sufi who is actually manifesting in epistemological path he is using. Kesimpulannya, dalam buku ini saya telah menyajikan kajian komprehensif mengenai epistemologi Al-Ghazali berdasarkan seluruh karya yang terkonfirmasi yang tersedia. Saya berargumen bahwa epistemologi Al-Ghazali berkembang melalui berbagai tahapan kehidupan. Ia memulai sebagai seorang konformis, yaitu menerima pengetahuan berdasarkan otoritas orang tua dan guru, namun kemudian melepaskan diri dari konformisme tersebut sejak usia dini. Ia menekankan pentingnya langkah ini bagi siapapun yang ingin mencari pengetahuan sejati. Karya-karya Al-Ghazali disusun secara kronologis untuk menggambarkan perkembangan epistemologinya sebagai seorang pelajar. Al-Ghazali menulis Al-Manhul dalam bidang usul fiqh. Ketertarikan epistemologis dasarnya dalam kitab ini terutama bersifat yuridis. Ia memusatkan perhatian pada persoalan-persoalan teknis yang menjadi bagian dari atau berkaitan dengan usul fiqh. Sebagai murid, Al-Ghazali meniru gurunya Al-Juwaini sebagaimana ia akui sendiri pada bagian akhir kitab ini. Meskipun hanya dalam beberapa kasus ia berbeda pendapat dengan gurunya dalam Al-Manhul, originalitasnya dalam usul fiqh tampak jelas dalam karya berikutnya Al-Mustasfa. Walaupun Al-Manhul menampilkan Al-Ghazali sebagai murid yang meniru, karya autobiografisnya Al-Munqidh min Al-Jalal yang ditulis menjelang akhir hayatnya memperlihatkan kesadaran personal yang sangat terfokus pada kebenaran itu sendiri. Perbedaan keyakinanlah yang mendorongnya untuk mencari kebenaran. Kesadarannya pada tahap awal kehidupannya terhadap berbagai aliran kepercayaan manusia mengantarkannya pada tahap pertama dari perjalanan panjang skeptisisme sistematis yang berlangsung hingga puncak pencariannya akan pengetahuan pada masa-masa terakhirnya sebagai pengajar di Madrasah Nizamiyah Baghdad. Kesimpulannya adalah Al-Ghazali keluar dari kondisi keraguan ini dengan kepercayaan pada iluminasi ilahi sebagai sumber pengetahuan. Menurutnya pengetahuan tidak mungkin dicapai tanpa cahaya ilahi yang dianugerahi oleh Allah. Iluminasi inilah yang menjadi dasar epistemologi sofistiknya dalam karya-karyanya seperti Ihya Ulumuddin, Bidayah al-Bidayah, dan Jawahir Al-Quran. Ia menegaskan pentingnya disiplin diri dan penyucian jiwa sebagai persyarat pencapaian pengetahuan transendental. Ia menempatkan kaum sufi sebagai kelompok yang paling unggul dalam mencari pengetahuan sejati. Dalam Abdur al-Fakir al-Ihya dan Minhaj al-Abidin, ia secara eksplisit membela tasawuf dan menjelaskan bahwa pengetahuan para sufi bersumber dari cahaya ilahi, bukan sekadar rasio atau transmisi otoritatif. Seluruh tema ini yang juga ditulis dalam terminologi sofistik tidak menyisakan ruang sedikit pun untuk keraguan bahwa epistemologi akhir Al-Ghazali pada hakikatnya bersifat sofistik. Perlu ditegaskan bahwa hal ini bukanlah pembelaan terhadap tasawuf di kaum tradisionalis yang berupaya menggambarkan Al-Ghazali pada akhir hayatnya sebagai sosok yang meninggalkan tasawuf. Yang ingin ditegaskan di sini adalah bahwa klaim semacam itu membutuhkan pembuktian yang kuat. Pembahasan yang telah saya baca dari bab 6 ini adalah Bab ini menguraikan perkembangan epistemologi Al-Ghazali secara kronologis dan tematis dengan menekankan perubahan orientasi intelektualnya dari pendekatan yuridis dan rasional menuju epistemologi sofistik. Perjalanan intelektual Al-Ghazali tidak dipahami sebagai perubahan yang terputus, melainkan sebagai proses bertahap yang saling berkesinambungan dalam pencarian kebenaran dan pengetahuan yang pasti. Pada fase awal kehidupannya sebagai pelajar, Al-Ghazali menunjukkan minat besar terhadap ilmu partikular, khususnya usul fiqh. Karya seperti Al-Manhul mencerminkan posisinya sebagai murid yang masih mengikuti pola pemikiran gurunya Al-Juwaini. Pada tahap ini, fokus epistemologinya bersifat teknis yuridis dan belum menunjukkan refleksi mendalam terhadap persoalan universal tentang hakikat pengetahuan dan kebenaran. Namun demikian, kecenderungan intelektual ini tidak dapat dilepaskan dari latar pendidikan formal dan tuntutan sosial akademik pada zamannya, di mana penguasaan fikih merupakan syarat utama legitimasi keilmuan. Tahap penting dalam perkembangan epistemologinya terjadi ketika Al-Ghazali menjadi pengajar di Madrasah Nizamiyah Baghdad. Pada periode ini, ia mulai melakukan kajian komprehensif terhadap berbagai aliran pemikiran, teologi, filsafat batiniah, dan tasawuf dalam upaya menemukan sumber pengetahuan yang benar-benar dapat diandalkan. Ia menyimpulkan bahwa filsafat, meskipun memberikan kontribusi dalam bidang logika dan matematika, gagal memberikan kepastian epistemologis yang absolut. Namun demikian, Al-Ghazali tidak sepenuhnya menolak filsafat. Ia justru mengadopsi metode logika sebagai alat bantu berpikir kritis dan sistematis. Salah satu kontribusi penting Al-Ghazali pada fase ini adalah pemikirannya tentang logika sebagai kriteria ilmu pengetahuan. Dalam era ilmu, ia mengemukakan konsep tiga hakim dalam diri manusia, indera, imajinasi, dan akal. Meskipun konsep ini kemudian disederhanakan dalam karya-karya selanjutnya, gagasan tersebut menunjukkan upayanya untuk membangun epistemologinya yang berlapis dan reflektif. Namun, pencariannya terhadap pengetahuan yang tidak dapat diragukan akhirnya membawa Al-Ghazali pada krisis epistemologi yang mendalam, di mana ia meragukan seluruh sumber pengetahuan termasuk akal. Krisis ini memuncak dalam pengalaman skeptisisme total yang berlangsung selama sekitar 2 bulan, hingga akhirnya berakhir melalui apa yang ia sebut sebagai iluminasi ilahi, kasar. Al-Ghazali sampai pada kesimpulan bahwa pengetahuan sejati tidak dapat dicapai semata-mata melalui rasio atau transmisi otoritatif, melainkan melalui cahaya ilahi yang dianugerahkan Allah. Disinilah fondasi epistemologi sofistik Al-Ghazali terbentuk. Pada fase akhir kehidupannya, Al-Ghazali menegaskan bahwa tasawuf merupakan jalan paling valid menuju pengetahuan sejati. Dalam karya-karya seperti Ihya Ulumuddin, Bidayah Al-Hidayah, dan Minhaj Al-Abidin, ia menekankan pentingnya penyucian jiwa, disiplin diri, dan latihan spiritual sebagai prasyarat pencapaian pengetahuan transcendental. Pengetahuan para sufi dipandang lebih unggul karena bersumber dari cahaya ilahi, bukan sekadar akal atau otoritas eksternal. Keseluruhan pembahasan ini menegaskan bahwa epistemologi akhir Al-Ghazali bersifat sofistik secara esensial. Namun hal ini tidak berarti ia menolak syariat, rasio, atau ilmu-ilmu partikular. Sebaliknya, Al-Ghazali berhasil mensintetiskan syariat, akal, dan tasawuf dalam satu kerangka epistemologisnya yang utuh. Oleh karena itu, anggapan bahwa Al-Ghazali meninggalkan tasawuf pada akhir hayatnya dinilai tidak memiliki dasar yang kuat dan memerlukan pembuktian lebih lanjut. Mungkin cukup sekian dari pembahasan buku yang saya baca saat ini. Mungkin kurang lebihnya mohon maaf apabila ada salah tutur kata, itu berasal dari saya, dan apabila terdapat kata-kata yang benar itu berasal dari Allah Subhanahu wa taala. Mungkin wabillahi taufik walhidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.